Okay, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. And I am doing this on Google Meet, so I'm going to be talking to some folks in the audience as well. And I am recording today, so if you missed part of this, you can come back and get it, and some other folks are going to be using it as well. So today we're going to talk about the English portion of the ACT. We're going to look at a couple of different documents. If you're in the Google Meet, I sent you an email that's got a practice test and then another sheet that's got the scale scores on it. So here's kind of the agenda for today and what we're going to do. First part, we're just going to talk about test format for the English portion of the ACT, some basic skills that you would need knowing the format. We're going to talk about scoring, and then we're actually going to talk about goal setting. Then we're going to move on and we're going to do a practice English passage together. We're going to score that, and we're going to try to figure out what types of questions are asked on the ACT English portion. Then I'm going to talk about the stuff that's on the board behind me. We're going to talk about some basics of English grammar, maybe some stuff that you haven't thought about since third grade. And then we're going to finish up that practice test, and by the end of the session, we're going to share, or we're going to score some of those items. So let's talk for just a moment about the format of the English portion of the ACT. So if you'll look at that test, you see that you've got 75 questions, and you have 45 minutes to complete that in. So most students don't run out of time on the English portion of the ACT. It sounds like you might be crunched for time, but that's generally not the case. You have 5 passages, and each of the 5 passages will have 15 questions. Generally speaking, you don't have to read the entire passage in English in order to figure out the correct answer. So the way that works, you've got an underlined portion, you're given 4 choices, you have to determine which of those corrects the underlined portion. Now, if you have 4 answer choices on each of those 75 questions, and every one of them, for the most part, has no change as an answer choice, how frequently will no change be the correct answer? Just as a matter of statistics, 1 out of 4 times, right? So 25% of the time, no change is going to be the correct answer. Now, for a lot of us, that's really difficult because we have in mind that if we see an underlined portion, we've got to fix the error. We just automatically assume there's a mistake there. We've got to change it. 25% of the time, that's not going to be the case. So just get yourself to thinking, okay, I'm not going to find errors in every single underlined portion. Another thing that you can use on the English test is if you're absolutely having to guess, like you have absolutely no idea what the correct answer would be, opt for the shortest answer. Because a lot of the questions on the English portion of the ACT are going to be questions to test your ability to eliminate redundancy or wordiness. And so often the shortest answer is going to be the best choice. If you will look at the sheet that says explanation of procedures used to obtain scale scores from raw scores, it looks like this. So those of you in the Google Meet, you should have this in an email from me. I want you to look at the English portion. So find the column that says test 1. And you have a list of numbers there that goes from 75 to 0. Okay, so that's the number of questions that you answer correctly on the English portion of the ACT. So the scale score tells you how that converts out to the score that you earn on the ACT. Does anybody know what the benchmark is for English? Like, where are you supposed to be in order to be considered college ready for English? It's 18. So English is 18, math is 19, reading is 20. So it goes 18, 19, 20 through those. There's really not a state benchmark for the science test. So find 18 under scale score, and then move your finger over to the raw score for test 1 English. How many questions do you have to answer correctly in order to get benchmark? 37 questions get you at benchmark. 37 out of 75. What is that, about 49%? 49, right at 50%. If you made 50% on a test in English, you'd be upset. Like, that's not good. You make 50% on this, you've made benchmark. And benchmark simply means that ACT says you have about an 80% chance of scoring an A or a B in a college level course of that subject area. So that's all that means. And it also determines whether or not we determine if you are college ready by that. Now, here's what I want you to do. Let's say, for example, that you've taken the ACT and you've answered 37 correctly. and you want to move your score to a 22. How many additional items do you need to answer correctly in order to achieve that goal of 22? Roughly 10. Okay, so think about it this way. If you are coming into this session today scoring at whatever score level, and you could learn 10 things that would help you answer 10 more questions correctly, think about what that would do for your score. I know a lot of times when we think about moving ACT scores, we get caught up in this idea that, I can't get to my score goal. It's just insurmountable. It's too difficult. But the reality is, when you start looking at it in terms of the numbers, 6 more questions answered correctly, 10 more questions answered correctly, 15 more questions answered correctly is a huge bump in your overall score. Let's say you move your English score up 5 points. What's that going to do to your composite? Well, it's an average. They're not going to bump it 5 points unless you move your other scores up equally. But you're going to have a big jump in your scores if you can move just one test area up several points. So what I want you to think about first of all today is knowing the format of the English test. 75 questions, 45 minutes. You're probably not going to run out of time. You know some strategies. For example, no change 25% of the time, shortest answer if I absolutely have to guess. What would be your score goal? And you don't have to say this out loud, but look at that. Where would you like to land in terms of your score in English? 18 is benchmark. If you score below 18 and you attend a public university in Kentucky, you're going to have to take a remedial course. That means a course in reading and writing that does not earn credit for college, and you have to have a C or higher in order to advance to the first freshman level reading or writing course. If you score 28 or higher in English, for example, at Western Kentucky University, you are automatically exempted from the first English course. So 28 or higher at Western, they consider you have mastered everything that you need to know in that first course. So think about kind of that guideline, 18, 28, where do you want to fall in there? 25 is probably a spot in between that would put you in contention for scholarship consideration. If you're 30 or higher, we're talking about probably a full ride scholarship to a lot of institutions. So we're talking about thousands of dollars that ride on your ability to answer just a few more questions correctly in English. So I hope that kind of puts it in perspective for you. Okay, what I would like for us to do first of all, after looking at that, is I want us to think about English Passage 1. So again, to the two of you who are in the live session for Google Meet, if you will check your school email account, I've emailed you 2 documents. One says blank B05, that's just the name of this English test, and the other was this document that gives you the scoring guide. What I would like for us to do first is to look at Passage 1. So Passage 1 begins on page 2. It's entitled Paul Revere Williams and La Concha Motel. You have 15 items that are in Passage 1, and I'm going to give you 9 minutes. So in 9 minutes, I would like for you to answer those 15 questions. We're going to try to determine what type of question is each one like. So is it a comma question? Is it a punctuation question? Is it a subject-verb agreement question? Because knowing the type of question helps you get the correct answer. So if you're doing this at home and you can't print this out, just pull it up on the screen and write down answers on a sheet of paper beside of you. If you're here, you can write on anything that I've given you. So mark up this test any way that you want to. So is everybody clear on what we're doing right now? Just the first 15 items, then we're going to stop, we're going to categorize them, and then we'll talk about right answers. I'm going to set the stopwatch for 9 minutes, and I may stop it a little bit early. You may begin. About half of your time has elapsed for passage one. So think about how your pace is going. And I will tell you that no change is the correct answer 4 times out of these 15. So once you get done, go back and see how many times have you used no change. Okay, I'm going to stop you now on passage one. And what I want to do is just walk through the right answers for the first 15 questions. And what I would like to train you to do is to think about, what is this question asking me to do? In other words, what is the skill and how can I label this? So we're actually going to label these 15 questions, talk about the right answer. And as you take more practice tests, start to think about the type of question it is. All right, here's number one. Your choices there. Architect Paul Revere Williams opened his own firm in 1922, and his vision and willingness to experiment led to a successful 50-year career planning buildings. There's nothing wrong with it. It is no change. So I told you that you would use no change 4 times out of the 15. So that's roughly 25% of the time. If you look at choice C, what's wrong with choice C? Wrong form of 2. Very good. So this is a question that's trying to get you to see, do you know your correct forms of 2, 2, and 2? And do you know the difference between lead and lead? Okay, so it's about verb tense and it's about correct usage. Question number 2 is not a grammar question per se, and it doesn't have no change as an option. That's why we say it's roughly 25% of the time no change is the correct answer. So the writer is considering revising the underlined portion to the following accurate phrase. If the writer were to make this revision, the essay would primarily gain. So including hotels, government offices, and hospitals gives you G, information about the kinds of buildings that Williams helped create. So G is the correct answer there. That is not a grammar question, but it's a rhetorical strategies question, or the author's purpose sort of question. Number 3, if you were labeling question 3, it's got 2 skills that you're trying to determine. One is subject-verb agreement. So let's find the subject. One of his most interesting designs were in Las Vegas. What's the one word that is the subject of that sentence? The grammatical subject. It is not designs, and let me tell you why it's not designs. Designs is the object of a preposition. So mark of his most interesting designs, I would put brackets around that. Just mark it off. So if a word, if a noun is the object of a preposition, it cannot be the subject. It can only be one function in a sentence. So knowing that, what's the subject? One. So the subject of that sentence is one. So would you say one were in Las Vegas? Now that's not the correct subject-verb agreement. If you were going to say it, you would say one was. That's not an option, but you begin to say this is the wrong subject-verb agreement, so no change can't be the right answer. So which one agrees with it? One stood, D. So one stood in Las Vegas. So that's the correct verb tense, and it's the correct subject-verb agreement. Number 4 was in Las Vegas, semicolon, the La Concha Motel. Do you use a semicolon to set up an announcement or a dramatic statement? No, you don't. We're going to talk about how we use semicolons in just a minute. This is not how you use them. What punctuation marks can you use to set up some sort of dramatic statement that says something's about to follow? You can use a colon for that. Do you have a colon as a choice? No. So what other punctuation mark is a lot like a colon? It's actually a dash. So a hyphen is what you use between 2 words. A dash is what you use between parts of sentences. So the correct answer is H. So it sets up a dramatic statement, much like a colon, and that's going to be part of the notes that we talk about today. All right, number 5. Number 5 was one of your no change was the correct answer, A. And the reason, A is the shortest answer, right? This is a question about wordiness, verbosity, redundancy, however you want to say that. But all the other choices, all the other distractors repeat needlessly information. So you don't ever want to do that. Okay, number 6, if you read the entire phrase, you're going to get it. Envisioning a motel that combined the name La Concha, which translates to shell, with the arched roofs typical of Georgia architecture, comma. Okay, now let me stop you there and tell you a grammar rule. The very next word has to be the noun that's being modified by that opening phrase. So did the lobby envision a motel? No, that's called a misplaced modifier. So the modifying phrase at the beginning of a sentence that's set off with a comma has to modify the noun that comes next. Who or what envisioned this hotel? Williams did. Look at your choices. H is the right answer. Williams designed a lobby that was meant to appear. So always think about if it has an introductory phrase set off by a comma, whatever comes next in that sentence is what's being modified. Number 7 was meant to appear from a distance like a giant shell. Okay, so take that phrase from a distance and either circle it or put parentheses around it. We call that an interrupter. You also might call it an aside. You're reading the sentence and then you step aside and you give some non-essential information that if you took a razor blade and cut it out, you would still have a grammatically correct sentence. So when I read that, I would say was meant to appear from a distance like a giant shell. So it needs punctuation at the beginning and at the end of that interrupter. Which one does that? Which choice does that? B. You've got commas around from a distance on both sides. Here's another rule. If you begin an interrupter or parenthetical with one type of punctuation, you have to end it with that same type of punctuation. So if you begin it with a comma, end it with a comma. Begin it with a dash, end it with a dash. Can you begin it with a colon and end it with a colon? Never. You can only use one colon per sentence. It has to come at the end. So it has to be the last clause or phrase at the end of a sentence. Number 8, on 3, not of the ones, but you need more specific information. So the correct answer is G, on 3 sides of the building, comma, Williams Design. Number 9 is no change. If you were labeling the question type, it would be a diction question. In other words, it's about word choice. And so jutted out is the most accurate word choice there. Why would you not use D, stuck super far out? It is informal. Will an informal choice ever be the correct answer? Never. Every passage on the ACT has a formal diction, formal word choice. So it'll never be something that's too casual. Number 10, inside the lobby, which was a place for gathering. Okay, if you say lobby, do you need to say it's a place for gathering? That's kind of implied. It's redundant. Shortest answer is the best answer. Which choice? J. Number 11, open space that functioned as a social gathering place and included the registration desk. Do you need any comma, any pause there? No pause is needed. Commas indicate pause. So C is the best answer. Number 12. 12 is a question about transition. You need a transition of contrast. What's the only word there that shows contrast? Although. So G is the correct answer. Number 13 is no change. That is punctuated correctly. You've got a comma, coordinated conjunction, independent clause on both sides, and an interrupter. So that's why you need to have commas around in 2006. Number 14, given that all the choices are accurate, which one provides the most relevant information at this point in the essay? The key word there is relevant, so G, including the original sign, because that's what that paragraph is about. And then number 15, the writer wants to add the following sentence to the essay. Where should you put it? Beneath each of the 3 arches was a glass wall with doors opening into the motel. So you've got to go back and find where those 3 arches are mentioned. And that's C, point C in paragraph 3. Time wasn't an issue, was it? You had 9 minutes for that passage. Most of you were finished in about 7 minutes. So the thing to remember is you're taking the ACT on a real test date. Don't rush yourself. You've got plenty of time. So you can pace yourself and be able to have plenty of time. Okay, the next thing I want us to do is we've kind of looked at passage 1. We've categorized and diagnosed the question type and come up with a fix for it. I want us to spend some time talking about sentence structure, punctuation, and pronoun case. So I'm going to attempt to move my computer so that you can see the board behind me if you're watching via Google Meet. I would recommend that you take notes during this session, that you write some of this information down because it is a review of some basic grammar stuff. It may be stuff that you remember, but I can guarantee you this is stuff that will show up on the English portion of the ACT. So I think you can see there. The very first thing I want to talk about is just basic sentence structure. So just the very basics of what constitutes a sentence and how you treat it. The first thing is an independent clause. An independent clause is, as its name suggests, it can stand alone. An independent clause is just another way of saying that it is a sentence. It has to have a complete subject and a complete predicate. So what's the difference then with a dependent clause? It cannot stand alone. So give me a word that might make a group of words dependent. You know any words that can make clause dependent? How about a word like while? While working on his essay. That can't stand alone as a sentence. We would classify that as a dependent clause. What do we have to add to it in order for that to stand alone as a sentence? Another independent clause. So if while working on his essay is the dependent clause, the very next word that comes after that has to be the word that's being modified. So while working on his essay, the student used Grammarly. Okay? So this is the dependent part. This is the independent part. Subject and verb can stand alone as itself. I know that's very basic, but much of what you have to answer on the English portion of the ACT is going to test your understanding of that. Now, let's talk about independent clauses and how you punctuate. If you have two independent clauses, there are three ways that you can punctuate them. Do you know the three ways to punctuate two independent clauses that come back to back? Period would be one. So just end punctuation between two independent clauses, that is correct. Semicolon would be another way. Two independent clauses can be joined by a semicolon. The third way is a comma, but not just a comma. You also have to have a coordinating conjunction. Examples of coordinating conjunctions: and, for, so, but, yet. Okay, those are all coordinating conjunctions. Can you have two independent clauses with no punctuation between them? No, that's called a run-on sentence. Can you have two independent clauses with just a comma between them? No, that's called a comma splice. So if you have an underlined portion on the ACT that includes that portion, look to see if it has a coordinating conjunction. Look to see if it needs a comma, or look to see if it needs a semicolon between those two independent clauses. Same thing about a dependent clause. If the underlined portion comes at the end of a dependent clause, it's at the beginning of the sentence and it modifies another noun in the sentence, make sure that it has a comma to set it off. Okay, so knowing independent and dependent clauses is really important. Okay, the second thing we're to talk about are basic punctuation marks. And again, it seems pretty basic, but a big majority of the English portion of the ACT is going to test your ability to do this and to do it well. We've already talked about commas in relationship to two independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction. So that would be probably the first rule, is that you use commas to separate two independent clauses with a conjunction. That's rule number one for using commas. I would suggest to you that the second major rule would be to separate items in a list. So if you were to say, I bought chips, dip, and soda. Do I need another comma in that sentence? Yes. So this is sometimes called the Oxford comma. And remember, ACT is formal. They expect you to put that comma there. In other places, it's acceptable not to use that Oxford comma, but for the ACT, they are testing to see that you can do that. So those are two rules. A third rule would be to separate or to mark off a modifying dependent clause. So like while working on his essay, that would be a modifying dependent clause that you would set off with a comma. Semicolons. So this is the punctuation mark right about here. You use semicolons, as we said over here, between two independent clauses with no conjunction. Or you can use a semicolon between two independent clauses with what's called a conjunctive adverb. Now, what are some examples of conjunctive adverbs? I'm going to give you a list. You can jot some of these down. Accordingly, consequently, furthermore, probably the most used, therefore, nevertheless, meanwhile, still, thus, indeed. All of those are considered conjunctive adverbs. And if you have two independent clauses with a conjunctive adverb, you include a semicolon with it. Colons, two dots. It signals something is to follow. It has to, now this is a rule that you may not be aware of, it can only be used at the end of an independent clause. An example of that, if I were to say, task that I must complete today, mow the lawn, read 2 chapters of history, and clean my room. That is not a correct use because I don't have an independent clause before the colon. Instead, I would say, I must complete several tasks today, mow the lawn, read 2 chapters of history, and clean my room. So it's only used at the end of an independent clause, and you're only going to use 1 colon per sentence. So like we said earlier, if you have an interrupter, you can't have it punctuated by a colon on one side, a colon on the other. You can only use a comma or a dash there. You cannot use a colon that way. Okay, apostrophes are going to show possession, or they're going to show contractions. If it's singular possessive, it's apostrophe S. If it's plural possessive, it's S apostrophe. If it's a singular word that ends in a double S, like boss, how do you make boss singular possessive? The boss's wife. Apostrophe S. Okay? So even though it ends in S, you want to maintain its singularity and make it possessive, it's going to be apostrophe S. Now, where some confusion sets in is when we start mixing possessives with contractions. For example, it's and its. You've got to know the difference. So let's just make sure. In your mind, what do you say when you see IT apostrophe S? It is. Train yourself always to read IT apostrophe S as it is. So in this case, it's is a contraction. Without an apostrophe, it is possessive, which is counterintuitive because we add apostrophes to make singular and plural possessives in normal circumstances. If you ever see ITS apostrophe on the ACT, will it ever be the correct answer? No, because it's not a word. And I've seen it as a distractor on the ACT. It's a distractor because it's there to distract you from the correct answer. So always read IT''S as a contraction for idiot. What about the difference between words like whose and whose? What's the difference between whose and whose, the way it's written here? What is this? It's a contraction for who is. So again, always read it in your mind as who is. So that means whose without an apostrophe, it's possessive. So make sure you're being careful with contractions and possessives. Okay, dashes. Dashes are used frequently on the ACT, and they're typically used to set off an interrupter. If you begin an interrupter with a dash, you end it with a dash. If you begin it with a comma, you end it with a comma. Now, why would a writer decide to use dashes instead of commas? If both are grammatically correct, what's the difference? Why would you use a dash instead of a comma? More emphasis. So a dash is more dramatic. It's just a lengthier pause than a comma. A comma is a slight pause. Okay, let's move on over here. And let's talk about, I should say, the pronoun case. What do we mean when we talk about the case of a pronoun? The thing to remember about pronouns is that pronouns have an antecedent. That's the noun that they're taking the place of. Pronouns have to agree with their antecedents in terms of number. So if it's a singular noun, it has to have a singular pronoun. If it's a plural noun, it has to have a plural pronoun. It has to agree with its antecedent in terms of gender. So if the noun is female, the pronoun has to be female. If it's male, the pronoun has to be male. So number, gender, and case. Case has to do with what its function is in the sentence. There are three cases, one being possessive, which we've kind of already talked about possessive case. These are possessive case pronouns, whose and its. But we can also talk about nominative case, which is in the subject position of the sentence, and the objective case, which is in the object case or object position of the sentence. So if I were to give you some nominative pronouns, for example, I, that's a nominative case subject pronoun. What's its objective counterpart? Me, okay? And its possessive case would be my or mine. Now, when do you use I versus when do you use me? For example, would you say, me and my brother mowed the yard? Would you say that and be correct? No. And this is one of those you can trust your ear. You're like, man, that does not even sound right. We may say it that way, but we know that's not correct. What's the correct answer? My brother and I. Now, can you use grammar to explain why that's correct? You know it's correct because your English teachers make you say it that way, right? Use grammar to explain why it's correct. Why is it I, not me? Because it's the subject of the sentence, not the object of the sentence. Okay, well, I guess we need to know what an object is. Objects can be object of a preposition. It can be a direct object. It can be an indirect object. Or it can be an object complement. Okay? If you are a noun functioning as the object of a preposition, you cannot be the subject of a sentence. There's no way. And the ACT will trick you on subject-verb agreement using objects of preposition. Let me give you an example. The vase of flowers are on the table. Are is the verb. Does it agree with the subject? What's the subject of that sentence? The vase of flowers are on the table? Okay, well, what one word? When I ask what's the subject, I'm talking about what one noun is the subject. It's vase. Can you explain using grammar? What's flowers? Object of a preposition of. If it's the object of a preposition, it can't be the subject. So it's vase is on the table. Even though when we say flowers is, it sounds wrong. But we've got to make it agree with the true subject of the sentence. The vase of flowers is on the table. ACT will do it at least once on every test that you take. So if you've just learned that today, you've upped your score. So just train yourself. Is that the object of the preposition or is that truly a subject? So how do you know prepositions? Words like of, among, through, below, between, near, by, beside, around, near, like, all of those are prepositions. There's 65 of them. So if you don't know prepositions, Google it and look at a list of 65 prepositions so that you'll recognize them. Okay. What if I use he or she? What's the objective counterpart for he and she? Him and her, right? So if you're using it as the subject of a sentence, she and I looked for Did you say look for he or look for him? She and I looked for he or she and I looked for him. Don't overthink it. Trust your ear. What would you say? Him. Now, can you use grammar to explain it? Why is it him and not he? The object of the preposition for, right? So knowing that that's the object of the preposition tells you that it's objective case. That's the grammar behind why that is the correct answer. So knowing those basics of independent clauses, dependent clauses, punctuation marks, commas, semicolons, colons, apostrophes, dashes, and knowing the difference between nominative case and objective case will get you gains on the ACT every single time. And you may already know those rules, but it's always good to have a refresher so that you understand. The part about subject-verb agreement and eliminating the intervening prepositional phrase that comes between the subject and the predicate, again, that's going to help you tremendously because that's going to show up on the ACT quite a bit. Okay, are there any questions about the basic notes that we've talked about in this session? And those of you who are in the live Google Meet session, feel free to pop into the chat box. And if you want something explained or if you want to think about something, put it in the chat box if you don't want to turn on your microphone and speak to us. Okay, I'd like for you to take out that practice test that I sent to you. And we've done passage 1 already. I'm going to ask you to do the remainder of this practice test. So you're going to do passages 2, 3, 4, and 5. You're going to have 36 minutes to complete this portion of the practice test. So if I see that most of you are finished before the 36 minutes is up, we'll go ahead and start talking about answers at that point. Here's what I'd like for you to do as you're doing this. I've armed you with some knowledge now, right? We've practiced one passage together where I showed you, okay, this is asking you about redundancy. This is asking you about dashes. This is asking you about subject-verb agreement. As you answer these questions, 16 through 75, if you recognize the question type, label it. So if you recognize this as being a comma question, just write the word comma beside of it. Or if you recognize it as being subject-verb agreement, write SV agree. That will help train you to notice and recognize the type of question you're answering. So 36 minutes, questions 16 through 75. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, I want to stop you where you are right now, and I'm cutting you short of the 36 minutes for passages 2 through 5 by about 8 minutes or so, but that's okay. So if you didn't get finished, that's why you didn't have the full 45 minutes that it would normally take to answer those 75 questions. Here's what I want to do in the remaining 10 minutes that we have together in our session. I want to carefully go through the correct answers for passage 2 because there's a few tricks that I want to teach you, some tips that can really save you time and gain you some more questions answered correctly. And then for passages 3 through 5, I'll just give you the correct answers and you can see how many you would have gotten correctly, answered correctly. All right, here we go. Number 16. This is the first one on passage 2. Here's the first trick I will show you. Look at the no change option, the octopus. It's singular. Then go over to the choices and look at G, H, and J. G is plural. H is singular, species, a species. J is singular. So if you have choices where 3 are singular and 1 is plural, then that one that's not like the others is probably going to be the right answer. So read it with the one that's not like the rest. Read it with the one that's plural. Often dismissed as aquatic oddities, octopuses are among the most intelligent animals on Earth. G is the right answer. It's the choice that's different from the other 3. And if you'll notice, oddities and animals are both plural in that sentence. So that's why grammatically G is the better choice. Okay, so remember that tip. If you can pick out which one is not like the other choices, it's probably the right answer. Number 17 is a question about redundancy. Researchers have documented octopuses navigating intricate mazes and redundantly, repeatedly, octopuses even open screw-top jars. The better choice is C, even opening screw-top jars. So you want to eliminate wordiness, verbosity, and redundancy. Number 18, notice what shows up here. Possessive and contractions for its. So when you read it apostrophe s, it is always it is. So the best choice here is between no change and G. The problem with no change is it's not crossed its tank, but across its tank. So G is the correct answer. Next page, number 19. Okay, so number 19 is another one of these. If you didn't know the grammatical rule here, and I'm going to tell you what it is, but if you didn't know what the grammatical rule was and you couldn't pick the right answer, look for the commonality in 3 choices, and the one that's different is going to be the correct answer. So no change is actions of the octopus were not based. Notice the word were. It's a past tense of the verb to be. Look at choice B, was not. Again, form of to be. Choice C, were not based. So you've got were, was, and were. Those are all forms of to be. D is octopus did not base its actions. There's no was, there's no were. It's the one that's different, and it is the correct answer. D is correct. Now, let me explain to you grammatically why it's the correct answer. Anytime you use a past tense form of to be, like was or were, and a past tense verb, you're using what's called passive voice. You want to opt for the active voice, and D is active voice. Now, that's not the same as present and past tense, but it has to do with voice. And if we do another English session, I'll go into more detail about the difference between active and passive voice. But for number 19, it's D, and you could have figured that out by picking the one that's different from the other 3 distractors. Number 20, this one has to do with what I call an idiomatic prepositional phrase. So in idioms, you just know what the correct prepositional phrase is. So an important role through animals, through isn't the right preposition. It should be in an animal's cognitive development, H. So singular, and use the pronoun in. So singular possessive, H. 22 is a question about wordiness. If you recognize this as a question about wordiness, then automatically you know the shortest answer is the best answer, D. 22 is no change. It's correct as is. 23, look for the 3 that are alike, and the one that's different is going to be the correct answer. Crazy, right? Super engaging, for real. What's wrong with those? They're too informal. So the one that's formal is D. This book provides in-depth descriptions. Never choose an answer choice on the ACT that's informal or casual. 24 is no change. 25, the shortest answer is to delete it, and that is the correct answer. D, delete the underlined portion. It will always be the shortest answer. 26 is a boxed question, so you know it's about rhetorical skills, not about grammar. And it says if your writer were to delete the phrase, what would happen? You would lose F, details emphasizing how adept octopuses are at mastering the puzzles. 27 is no change because not only but also is a correlative conjunction. It comes in a pair. 28, the key word in number 28 is method. You want to emphasize the method. H does that, ought to break. So breaking is the method they're using. And number 29, again, use that strategy. Which three are alike? The one that's different is going to be the correct answer. Therefore, for example, and conversely, all use a transition. The one that doesn't use a transition is the correct answer, D. Researchers have noted. And the number 30 is no change. Okay, so what have you learned in passage 2? That if you can identify a commonality amongst three distractors, look very carefully at the one that's different because it's probably going to be the right answer. Okay, now we're going to put some speed on this so that I can give you the correct answers 31 through 75. Here we go. 31 is A, no change. 32, G, manipulating. 33 is C, using only her hands. 34 is no change. 35, D. 36, no change. 37, C. 38, J. 39, D. Delete is always the shortest option. 40, G. 41, no change. 42, the correct transition, it's a chronological transition, J, finally. 43, the correct placement would be B after the word hands. 44, H. 45, B. 46, J. 47, the correct transition is D, still. 48, G. That's an example where the shortest answer is not the correct answer. It doesn't work every time. 49 is no change. 50 is G. 51, C. 52 is no change. Number 53, the writer is considering revising the underlined portion to the following, a certain effect. Should the writer make this revision? You've got two that say yes, two that say no. No is the correct answer. Now look at the rationale behind it. D is the correct rationale. No, because it less clearly conveys the striking appearance of the crater. 54, shortest answer is the best answer. G, crowd. 55 is no change. Notice what showed up in number 55, ITS apostrophe. I told you earlier that'll never be the right choice because it is not a word. That's why they're called distractors. They're there to distract you from the correct answer. Number 56, J, someone. 57, C. 58, J. 59, D. And 60 is H, no, because it instead describes one person's experience watching the sunrise. Number 61, correct answer is D, the shortest answer. 62, G. 63, B. 64, J, again, shortest answer. 65, D. 66 is asking you to pick the correct demonstrative pronoun. It is G, which. 67 is C. 68, H. There you're using a dash. Can't use a semicolon because there's not two independent clauses there. 69 is D. There again, look at choice C, ITS apostrophe, not a word. Don't ever pick that one. 70 asks you to think in reverse. You're picking the one that's not acceptable. So 3 are correct, 1 is wrong. The one you should have selected is G because it's wrong. 71 is no change. 72 is a box question. It's rhetorical skills, so it is H after sentence 3. 73 is C. 74 is G. 75 is C. Thank you guys for attending. There are more ACT prep sessions that are coming up. You have one in math, one in reading, one in science, and then one that combines all 4 areas. If you can participate in those, please do. If not, we have recorded meet sessions and we can email those to you. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone in person or in our Google Meet audience? If you want to turn your mic on and ask a question, now would be the time to do that. We're done. 4:30 was our ending time, so you're free to go, free to leave the meet. Thank you guys very much for participating in today's prep session. I'll stay on for just a few more minutes.